Okay, well, I'm Jim Wades, calls WB8SIW, and I'm, of course, with Radio Relay International. I am actually secretary for the organization, the board of directors, and I also serve as emergency management director for Radio Relay International. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about the organization as we get into the presentation, but I've been a ham for, I don't know, 40 some odd years. And you know, been very active in ham radio with a few breaks here and there over the years. But I guess that's I don't know, what else do you need to know there, Dan?
You're doing fine. You're doing fine.
Okay. So anyway, I guess we'll get into the presentation here then, if you would like, and we'll start talking a little bit about it.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen and bring up the slideshow. Can you guys see the slides?
We do, we do.
Excellent, excellent. So again, I'm representing Radio Relay International, and Radio Relay International was founded in 2016. It's a nonprofit public benefit corporation, an NGO, and we're dedicated to the modernization, development, and maintenance of an international messaging system. So essentially, we are dedicated to, let's say, the improvement and enhancement of what most people would call the national traffic system, right? So we were essentially formed out of the assets and nets of the national traffic system. As a general rule, as things currently stand, Radio Relay International operates the NTS infrastructure above the state or section level. This would include things like IATN circuits, region and area nets, and the digital traffic network. And we'll touch briefly on how these different resources interact. We're not going to give a tutorial on, say, the topology and functions of the traffic system. We're just going to generally give you an overview of the organization and our management approach and things of this nature. One of the things that's happened since we took over the management of a kind of, let's call it the infrastructure level of the NTS, is it has expanded significantly to other parts of the world. So for example, Europe, we have nets now in Asia, Oceania, primarily Australia, New Zealand, this type of thing. And of course, the digital traffic net is fairly well established in Europe. And we actually handle some traffic out of Europe on a fairly regular basis. So we've kind of taken to calling it the INTS because it's really not just a national traffic system anymore. It's becoming an international traffic system. This is just one of many developments that have occurred since RRI got involved in its program of improving and modernizing the national traffic system. Also, we sponsor several different programs, which we'll talk about. The National SOS Radio Network, the Neighborhood Ham Watch Program, the Boy Scout Radio Watch Program, and other programs that are really designed to promote the purposeful use of two-way radio. And so again, we'll talk about how some of those programs fit into the national traffic system and so forth. So again, a nonprofit public benefit corporation. Essentially, we're here to promote the modernization, development, enhancement of the, let's call it the national messaging layer or the national traffic system. So obviously, since we were formed out of the national traffic system, that remains our core mission. So we believe that there is value in universal basic traffic handling skills. These are the skills that apply to pretty much any radio operating activity. the use of proper procedural words and phrases, the ability to use the ITU phonetic alphabet properly to convey complex technical information correctly, the ability to perform the administrative tasks that are associated with public service communications, keeping radio logs, keeping a file of messages transmitted and received, noting message traffic from which station a message is received and which station a message is relayed, the ability to properly deliver and service a message. So we believe that these fundamental skills have value, and so we support the continued enhancement of traffic handling as an operating activity. We also believe that community outreach remains important. As the world has changed in recent decades, amateur radio in some respects has become increasingly invisible. There's a large amount of media noise. There's an emphasis on other technologies, and a properly managed radiogram origination and delivery process can translate into what one would call an educational or public relations opportunity to explain the amateur radio service, its basis of purpose, and of course, create what you might call an apologia for our emergency communications services. So we see, again, value in the training component. We see value in the potential public relations opportunity that arises from the origination and delivery of a professional delivery of a third-party message. And we see, quite frankly, a degree of fun and challenge in traffic handling simply as an operating activity. So these are kind of the day-to-day values of the traffic networks. And finally, there's always value in building infrastructure. And of course, because these nets operate 365 days a year, we're essentially building and enhancing an infrastructure. We're establishing relationships between radio operators and served agencies and let's say associated organizations, ARES, Oxcom, RACES, Mars, etc. So the process of performing the traffic handling function essentially enhances this the development of this infrastructure and the relationships that support it and enhance operational readiness. So the traffic networks or the messaging layer that we operate is essentially our core mission. And then we have other programs or affiliated programs, you might say, that are designed to support and enhance that mission. So in this modern age, we're often asked, well, do you need traffic nets when there's the internet, email, and cellular data networks? Now, there's several ways, of course, one could answer that. I could point to just one of our RRI registered radio operators that handled well over 2,000 messages out of Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, or similar types of circumstances, public service activities. But I think the question of the relevancy of the traffic nets and the traffic system might be rephrased as, well, can traffic nets compete with the internet, email, and cellular data networks? And in response to this, I would point out that amateur radio emergency communications or public service networks have never had the capacity to compete with government or commercial telecommunications services. Even if you go back to 1920 or 1940 or 1960, the capacity of Western Union Postal Telegraph, Canadian National Telegraphs, etc., the Bell system, far exceeded anything amateur radio has been able to do throughout its history. But obviously, if you look at it, these commercial telecommunications infrastructures sometimes fail. And in these circumstances, amateur radio fills in the gaps, right? So we have significant earthquakes, hurricanes, wildfires like the Camp Fire that occurred in California, the potential for cyber attacks, terrorism. I was in Nashville immediately after the bombing of the telephone company's central office, and there were severe disruptions to cellular data networks throughout much of Tennessee. And, we take for granted, for example, that the cellular telephone networks are always going to operate. So the reality is amateur radio still remains relevant because we have this capacity to fill in these gaps and to provide, say, value-added services to our served agencies, relief organizations, things of this nature. So, the traffic system, ARIES, any of these organizations all have a role to play, and they all have the potential to fill in these gaps. So we feel that there's great value in just developing these basic communications networks, providing the training and experience that can translate to any type of public service communication situation. So our basic philosophy you might outline as follows, okay? In the pursuit of this core mission, we want to look for the things that are of value. So one of the things that we feel the traffic system offers is universality. It's an open architecture. You can access it pretty much using any mode or method from basic radio telegraph, CW, voice communications, various digital modes, they're the universal common denominators. So for example, I can walk into pretty much any amateur radio station in the world, and the odds are pretty good. It has a microphone and a transceiver. I can pretty much turn on any functional amateur radio transmitter and receiver, whether it's 80 years old or 5 years old, and it has the capacity to do CW. So, these universal common denominators, these multiple modes and methods, be it CW, voice, digital modes, whatever, all provide an open architecture that is well suited, you might say, to solving connectivity problems in a kind of a dynamic way. So the other thing that we see great value on is standardization. Standard message formats, that is the universal radiogram, has lots of advantages for the MCOM world. We'll touch a little bit more on that later as we go into sort of I guess what you might call an Appalachia for the radiogram. But, the standard message format, standard procedures, all inculcate efficiency. And of course, we promote professional standards. We believe that a goal, even though we're amateurs, is to promote a certain level of professionalism so that any community service we provide is effective and reliable. And I think most importantly, Radio Relay International was formed to be a non-political organization. In other words, we want to, whenever possible, isolate RRI from, say, parochialism, rivalry between ARIES groups, issues that arise between organizations. Mission success is always the first and foremost goal of any public service organization, particularly nonprofit NGOs that are here to serve the community. So again, this is our basic philosophy. We want universal access from common denominators through up-to-date digital modes. We want standardized procedures and message formats. We want to inculcate professional standards to ensure quality community service and reliability. We want to be non-political. And of course, again, we're here to build infrastructure, okay? And of course, infrastructure means not just, say, networks, but the people that operate these networks. This cooperation, again, builds that community, sense of community, and the relationships that can be leveraged in a positive manner in time of emergency. And fundamentally, we would like to see ourselves as quiet professionals. We believe that quality programs attract quality people, and these programs in turn will promote the purposeful use of two-way radio technology, in particular the amateur radio service. So again, we call it, we sort of unofficially now call it the INTS, but the National Traffic System, Radio Relay International, is again an open messaging infrastructure. It's available to local radio clubs, MCOM units, individual radio amateurs who might have a reason to serve their neighborhood or community independently in time of emergency. We again operate what we call the manual mode net infrastructure built around CW and voice nets and some, let's call them fuzzy mode nets, fuzzy mode digital nets. Then of course we have the RRI digital traffic network, which is an automated modified hybrid mesh network that supports high traffic volumes. For example, you can originate large quantities of batch message in a form of batch message file. The sorting and automatic forwarding occurs using software, and the nodes essentially transmit that traffic as soon as it's uploaded to its destination. So again, we want to have both modernization, you might say, and innovation, but we also see value in retaining the common denominators, those old reliable modes, because everybody's got a microphone, everybody's got basic single sideband or FM capability or whatever the case might be. So one of the things that we had to look at when we formed Radio Relay International was the reality that the national traffic system had been kind of, for lack of a better term, it had kind of gone pasture sour. I'm apologizing for using a horseman's term, but I work a lot with horses. And so, you know, an analogy might be if I take a beautiful, healthy draft horse and I put him out in a pasture with no job to do and no structure, no guidance, no discipline, he becomes what a horseman calls pasture sour. He atrophies. And this sort of happened with the national traffic system. And there's probably a variety of reasons why this happened, and they're really not worth going into, but we felt the program was worth saving. So we began to essentially rebuild the traffic system. Now, one of the first things we, of course, looked at was how would we actually respond to an emergency? In 2015, the administrator of FEMA, Craig Fugate, tasked the national traffic system with providing connectivity between the Cascadia Rising exercise in the Pacific Northwest and the National Response Coordination Center in Washington, D.C. Now, I have a background in professional emergency management, 25 years as a certified professional emergency manager, and I did a fair amount of counterterrorism planning and exercise design in the areas of port security, things of this nature. So I was tasked with developing an exercise design and evaluation process. However, one of the first things that we had to confront was that nobody had ever created an emergency plan for the traffic system. No such animal existed. So before we could design the exercise plan and evaluation process, we had to design a prototype national response plan. And so we developed this in 2015 for use during Cascadia Rising. And once we had the plan developed, then we designed an analytical exercise implementation and evaluation process. Now, I'm not going to cover that here, but if you look online, you can find some of the slides and so forth from, we actually have a course, it's entitled Designing an Emergency Communications Exercise. It goes into the fact that, you know, the exercise has to be, it has to be objective, it has to have metrics, in other words, it has to be measurable, and it has to be realistic and attainable. And one of the mistakes that we discovered that happens in many amateur radio MCOM organizations is the fact that the testing or the evaluation of amateur radio participation is often limited only to the ability to establish connectivity. But establishing connectivity is not the same as communicating. So if you imagine that a served agency official tenders a message for origination to a radio amateur, the radio amateur has to take that message, inject it into a network, the message has to flow through the network, and then when the network arrives at its destination, it has to be printed out or transcribed, perhaps transferred to another radio network. It might be a public safety network or a simple telephone call or a fax machine or whatever, ultimately to reach the addressee. Okay, this is the whole communications process. So what we looked at were ways to ensure that that message gets from point A to point B, and all the necessary administrative tasks and so forth are accounted for in the process of messaging. So out of Cascadia Rising, the exercise occurred in June of 2016, we eventually put together a set of national emergency communications response guidelines. And I have a link to that here later in the program. But these guidelines essentially outline the process for requesting activation of the traffic system in support of a disaster operation, be it from an ARES EC or a served agency official or from whomever. Okay, it specifies an alert notification procedure. It has very specific guidelines for managing circuit capacity through load balancing, specialized circuits, how one defines volunteer tasking, and how one assigns networks based on both the scope of the disaster, the geographic distribution of the disaster, and the priority of message traffic that is going to be transmitted through that network, be it welfare, priority messages, emergency messages, etc. The plan also establishes a variety of specialized functions, connect frequencies for digital traffic stations at the section level, connect frequencies and download frequencies for our WinLink RRI gateway stations. It defines certain standard message formats for situational awareness reporting and weather observations. It specifies an operational readiness message, which is transmitted to an operator whose responsibility it is to populate a spreadsheet that associates everyone on the traffic system with an ARES group, served agencies with which they have connectivity, what nets and frequencies they're active on, and their operating duration and other factors, so that if, for example, somebody at the FEMA NRCC were to come to me and say, can you get a message to Glens Ferry, Idaho? I can look at that modified ICS 205 spreadsheet and say, yes, we have a station on this network, this frequency, and this is the best routing to expedite its flow through the traffic system. So we created this emergency plan in late 2016, early 2017. And since that time, we have been going through the process of exercising that plan. So RRI conducts, we try and conduct 4 quarterly exercises or drills involving the traffic system each year. Interestingly, much of the participation in these exercises comes not so much from the traffic operators who enjoy handling the traffic, but from ARES groups around different parts of the country. And so some of these are drills more than exercises. They familiarize operators with, particular message format. They simulate a small disaster with situational awareness reporting, etc. Some focus on technical and operating capabilities. We might just test a certain number of CW nets, or we might just test the digital traffic network, or we might do something of that nature, test the WinLink RRI interface. And then, of course, what accounts usually for the functional and full-scale exercises are these larger exercises in which we support either agencies or Ares groups. So Cascadia Rising would be an example. The U.S. Navy medical exercise we supported a year or two ago, the recent MarsComX exercise. We're also doing some ongoing message originations to emergency management directors in selected states. The messages originate on the Mars networks. They move into Radio Relay International, and then of course they're routed to their destination to an EM director who acknowledges receipt of the message and confirms accuracy and receipt. So some of these things just go on randomly during day-to-day operations, you might say. And so again, you know, we support pretty much individuals, Ares groups, MCOM groups of any kind, React, Ares, it doesn't matter. We are an open, nonpartisan infrastructure, you might say. Now, another problem that we ran into was I guess I would prioritize it by saying the lack of peer review. So if one goes online and say Google's traffic handling, one will see all kinds of courses representing all kinds of opinions. And not all of these are peer reviewed. And not all of them have sort of what you might call a linear approach to training and education that takes into account prerequisites. So Radio Relay International has put together a set of standard training classes, most of which are conducted online, with a couple of exceptions like the field operations workshops, which obviously we haven't presented over the last year because of COVID, but we hope to pick those back up. The courses, again, are all peer-reviewed. We insist on a professional quality of instruction. And at the state level, when we get requests from, say, section traffic managers or net managers or others for the, let's say, to use the training materials, we insist that they kind of go through the class, understand the instructional standards that we have to ensure a good quality of service to the amateur radio community. We've also, over the last 5 or so years, developed a wide variety of documentation. The Radio Relay International Training Manual, the Field Manual, updated methods and practices guidelines, and a whole bunch of work product to help standardize, improve, and promote a professional quality traffic system. And I'll show you some examples of this as we reach the end of the presentation. So this is, you can find this on our webpage, but this is a guide to training classes that's published on our webpage with prerequisites, associated training materials such as books or other activities. Some examples of certificates that we issue for registered radio operators, or a training certificate, or proficiency certificates for people, for example, to demonstrate a proficiency, say copying our CW bulletins or participating in emergency exercises, things of that nature. So we've been issuing a lot of these certificates, particularly during COVID-19. When we had some time, people were at home, and we put on a lot of training classes in 2020. So again, I'm trying to keep this to an hour. We're talking about a pretty large scale organization here, really. And so I'm kind of trying to compress a lot of information and insight, hopefully, into your, so that all of you will have a better understanding of what RRI is all about. Now, another thing that we looked at was let me preface this, I guess, by saying we're not in the local MCOM business. we support local MCOM groups, but we're not here, say, as an ARES group or something of that nature. But we did see value in some programs that had been kind of, let's say, ignored by the mainstream organizations. And so we started adopting these programs as part of Radio Relay International. And so the very first one we looked at was the National SOS Radio Network. This concept essentially answers the question, what happens when the cell phones don't work? As we found out with Hurricane Katrina, and perhaps we found out with Hurricane Maria, and quite frankly, as I found out in Nashville here probably some months ago, the reality is that cellular disruptions happen. Communications outages occur, 911 outages occur. And essentially what the National SOS Radio Network does is volunteer radio amateurs monitor FRS Channel 1 and time of emergency for citizens that require assistance. You know, many people have these blister pack, UHF, FRS radios. They can step out into their front yard or go up to the second floor of their home and request assistance. And if you look on our webpage, there are actual radio PSAs that can be broadcast in a community that's perhaps suffering a communications outage or has suffered from a hurricane or an earthquake, and which basically promote this concept of the National SOS Radio Network, the 1, 2, 3 concept. Put batteries in the handheld radio, turn off the privacy tones, tune it to channel 1, go outside or to a high location in your home and request assistance. And many radio amateurs have the ability to monitor these 450 or 460 megahertz FRS frequencies. So this is really a program that's designed to fill in some of these communications gaps during a major disaster. And we've had some success with this, but we need to promote it. We need to get the word out, and we really don't have the bully pulpit, say, of an ARRL or a larger amateur radio organization. Another program which is kind of related to National SOS is Neighborhood Ham Watch, and in some areas they call this the Neighborhood Radio Watch. So the concept here is that if you look at the traditional model of amateur radio public service, we have this process of shadowing. So let's say you send 10 search and rescue volunteers out into a neighborhood after an earthquake, and radio amateurs are assigned to them, and they shadow them, and perhaps they provide communications. The problem with that is it's pretty labor intensive. And today there are just many available short-range communications options. You know, there's the FRS, GMRS, there's still CB radio, which works surprisingly well in primarily rural areas. The idea here is that a VOAD, a search and rescue team, faith-based group would have its own internal communications with amateur radio clubs or ARES groups providing the training and technical assistance. They maintain their own communications network. Much of their communications will remain within their organization, but then an amateur radio gateway operator provides the interface or the traffic exchange between the Neighborhood Ham Watch network that supports this VOAD, and then, of course, with, you know, he provides that interface to, say, emergency management, you know, public safety, WinLink, Radio Relay International for the broader infrastructure. And our first prototype program was developed by New York City Amateur Radio Emergency Communications Services and the main section of the ARRL. And that was our prototype, and it established a model. And then our next program that was developed was in response to the Camp Fire. And the amateur radio organization in that area found out that the cellular systems failed very rapidly during the Camp Fire, and they have been building up a fairly significant neighborhood radio watch or ham watch program around GMRS assets, with amateur radio operators providing the training, the technical support, and assistance. And again, you know, organizations, citizens, etc., are equipped with these basic GMRS capabilities, but the amateur radio organization, the Aries Group, for example, provides the, let's say, gateway function and connectivity to these higher level functions, agencies, and organizations, and has proven to be very successful in that area of California. And since then, other organizations are beginning to, of course, use these as models for their program. Our role in this is really just to provide a model and guidance and, you know, so forth to promote the program. But it is a Radio Relay International program. So it's related somewhat to National SOS in that most of these organizations function using GMRS and FRS assets, which are interoperable. And of course, amateur radio provides the oversight. So you might imagine, you know, a diagram like this that it kind of stole from one of our other training programs. But you know, you have this basic network that supports the local community organization. They communicate with an amateur radio gateway, and the gateway provides that connectivity to the Aries net, the EOC, the public safety answering point, WinLink, RRI, traffic networks, etc. And in that respect, the amateur radio gateway becomes a force multiplier. And I guess one of the ways you could say this is not everybody has to be a ham. As a matter of fact, in some respects, distributing demand on circuit capacity across multiple radio services probably has some advantages to amateur radio, not just in terms of managing circuit capacity and load balancing in an MCOM environment, but it also frees up radio amateurs to provide the higher value support to, say, direct service to served agencies. So again, it's a force multiplier in that respect. And again, you can do CB. Citizens Band is kind of, actually we got some programs on CB radio that generally function in remote areas. CBs are cheap, fairly effective, unless you're in an urban location. Then they're kind of useless. But then of course, we looked at scouting, right? You need to be growing the radio amateurs of tomorrow. And I won't dig too deeply into this program again for lack of time, but Joe Ames, who's our chairman, former section manager of Eastern Pennsylvania and former NTS Eastern Area Chair. Joe is kind of responsible for developing this program, training materials, and you know, policies and so forth. And again, the idea is to encourage scouts to become familiar with the purposeful use of two-way radio. So that's kind of an overview. You might summarize it by saying that, you know, we recognized a need for a cohesive approach to emergency communications. We saw a need to modernize and enhance and improve participation in the traffic system. We saw a need we saw the training value in the traffic system, the value in universality, common denominators, as well as some of the advantages to the way in which our digital traffic network operates. And then, of course, we saw value in these other programs. We're trying to create a nexus, you might say, between these processes to you know, enhance amateur radio's capabilities, enhance participation in the amateur radio service, and essentially encourage people to see the value in the purposeful use of two-way radio. Now, my program's almost over, but I would be incomplete without addressing the issue of the radiogram, or perhaps creating an apologia for the radiogram. One of the things that may have contributed to some of the let's say, I hate to use the word marginalization. That's not really the word I'm looking for. It would be the you know, kind of deterioration, you might say, of the national traffic system, was this idea that the radiogram was no longer relevant. Now, it's important to understand that the radiogram is really no different than an email. It consists of three parts, essentially. It consists of network management data, the message serial number, message priority, station of origin, a check for determining completeness, place of origin, and a date-time group. It's network management data. This is essentially identical to everything that's appended to an email, for example. Then, of course, it has an address or to line, has a signature or a from line, and then it conveys intelligence. In this respect, the only difference between, say, for example, the NIMS ICS 213 minimum standard and the radiogram is that the radiogram adds network management data. And this network management data is actually surprisingly important. It's not an affectation. It is a methodology, or it's data that allows one to service and reply to messages that are transmitted through multiple networks. So for example, if you look at the message number, imagine that you're originating 300 or 500 messages from a state EOC during a significant disaster, and you get a reply in reference to one of those messages. It is much easier to understand the temporal and subject matter context of that reply message if it says reference message number 3 or reference message number 225. You can quickly go look through your file of originated messages, see which one it applies to, and say, oh, okay, I see, you know, the context and who's responsible, and I'll ensure that this issue is delivered. Okay, this reply is delivered along with context. The message number, serial number, exists for a reason. Message prioritization exists for a reason, right? An emergency message is more important than a priority message or a welfare message. If I have to reply or route a message back to the addressee or to the man who, or woman whose signature appears on a message, I need to know the station that's associated with that person, and I need to know the location of that person. Okay, each of these components have a network management function that go with them. We have regularly transmitted content and radiogram format to served agencies. They accept them every time. The Federal Emergency Management Agency had radiograms appearing directly in their data stream at the National Response Coordination Center on the big screen. So the radiogram is really just an ICS 213 minimum standard message, but with the addition of important network management data that's essential to record keeping, routing replies, and associating specific amateur radio stations with specific networks, locations, and agencies. And that's why you see these things like, you know, message number, priority, you know, a date time group. You know, why do you send a message in UTC? Well, in Michigan, there's 2 time zones. In Nebraska, there's 2 time zones. You know, in Indiana, there's 2 time zones. You know, if a message is moving from, say, California to Maine, the use of UTC prevents confusion when messages have to be placed in temporal context. So I'm not going to dig real deeply into this concept, but I think there was kind of a narrative going on for a time that the ICS 213 had to be used in its minimum format, but in reality, agencies, networks, and even a common email appends network management data as a matter of practice. And so we see great value in the radiogram because it actually fits into the emergency planning process because you can then see how to route a message back in the most expeditious manner, particularly if something that's time sensitive. The other value in it is it's interoperable. So radio amateurs do sometimes tend to believe that they are going to have complete control over the origination and delivery process. And that may be true at, say, if a message only moves within a county areas group. But imagine that your message is moving across a state or to an adjacent state. The message may be originated on a digital circuit capable of upper and lower case, automatic error correction, et cetera. But when it arrived, say, at an amateur station at an EOC, the addressee may not be in that EOC. He may be out in the field. That message may need to be taken to a talk group on a public safety communications channel, or it may need to be delivered by telephone, or it might have to be delivered verbally in some cases. We don't know. In such cases, things like trying to convey mixed case, confusing punctuation, things of this nature become problematic. So brevity, simplicity, minimal punctuation, let's call it case insensitivity, all facilitate interoperability. They allow messages to move on and off digital networks onto amateur or public safety voice networks, etc. So the idea here is that, you know, I'm not saying for that matter, we don't believe everybody should use the radiogram, but the radiogram has significant value because some of these benefits that it offers, particularly in the medium and long haul MCOM environment. And then, of course, we should probably talk about routine messages. Again, we encourage participation in the traffic handling world because, first of all, handling radiograms is fun. And if we're not having a bit of fun doing this, then it's no longer a fun hobby. But the reality is the skills, the techniques, the methods that are used to convey a routine message apply directly to provide, say, conveying an important radiogram or radiogram ICS 213 message in an operational environment in time of emergency. And of course, by operating nets daily, 365 days a year, we also encourage operational readiness in time of emergency. So traffic handling remains incredibly relevant to a healthy and viable amateur radio service. And our goal is to partner with organizations that agree with the sentiment. The ARRL obviously plays an important role in the traffic system. You know, other organizations should be playing an important role in the traffic system. And is it the only tool available? Of course not. You know, there's WinLink and there's different communications networks that are built at the local and state level. But the traffic system remains very relevant and very important. I guess I would also conclude here by maybe pointing out that if you go to our webpage, you will find www.radio-relay.org. You'll find a whole bunch of information there. And perhaps one of the most useful sections of that page is the publications section. This is the section that has our emergency plan and our training manual and our field manual and a whole bunch of other documents that you can download and look at in PDF format. If you want to learn a little bit more about how RRI was created, why it was created, etc., there's a fairly good Ham Radio Now interview with myself and Joe Ames. It's episode 394. You can find it on YouTube and on the Ham Radio Now webpage. And you might want to take some time to listen to that interview. I think it'll provide some very useful insights. We also publish a newsletter. We have been actually since 2012 as the QNI newsletter. and you're welcome to read through the back issues of those. I'll show you some examples of this stuff here in conclusion. And of course, we do register radio operators. So if you want to get on our mailing list, you can get involved. You can register as a radio operator. Also, we do have a curated net directory. So if you look at the ARRL net directory, it relies on the net managers to keep it up to date, and that's a bit problematic. So what we did as an alternative is we have developed what you might call a curated net directory. Charles Hargrove of the New York City Amateur Radio Emergency Communications Services Group maintains the curated net directory for us, and he goes ahead and essentially vets all the entries to make sure they're up to date. He updates the directory regularly, and is by far the most accurate directory of traffic nets that's available online, and it's available also on the publications section of our webpage. So, again, I do want to stress, that we are not a membership-based organization. While we have registered radio operators, we are a nonprofit organization. We do not charge dues. We accept donations. We'd be happy to, get a few bucks from people to keep our operation going. But we are actually, our membership is the Nets. The Nets vote to affiliate with RRI, and they become the membership of the organization. So we're actually an association of traffic nets. And we have, of course, a board of directors and corporate officers, which oversee the business operations, you might say, of RRI. So we do not charge dues, nor do we have a membership-based organization. And we did this by design. We want to be non-political, and we want to be responsive to the needs of the amateur radio community. If we are responsive to the needs of the amateur radio community, they donate. We're able to carry out our programs. If we're not serving or acting in their interests, then we don't. And so that was also by design. RRI wants to be purely as altruistic as possible, you might say. So let's do this. I'm going to just go through some documents here and just give you some samples. So the first thing I want to go through here is, this is an example of our net directory. It's basically done by region. Okay, so like here you can see European Union. This is Oceania, Australia, New Zealand. It's kind of alphabetical. This is the eastern area, which is the eastern United States. And then, of course, from there it's broken down by states and the like. And then, of course, come into the central area. And then, of course, western area. And you can look at all the different traffic nets here. These are the IATN frequencies, our inter-area traffic nets, things of this nature, net manager contact information. You can find this on our publications page. You're welcome to dig through our training manual here. Basically, there's an introduction to disaster telecommunications planning and theory. We talk about some of the origins of the various amateur radio public service programs and how they interact. And we go into how the traffic system is structured, basic net procedures, bunch of reference data, things of that nature. This is our field manual. I guess I didn't back that up to the beginning. I didn't read through this. It has a lot of good technical information about the traffic system. And so you can read through that. We also have fillable radiograms. This was something else that was lacking in the traffic system. Pardon me, I'm going to take a sip of water or soda or whatever. So these are available in different forms and formats on our page. You can populate these, on your computer or whatever, and print them out or save them as a PDF and email them to somebody, or fax them, or whatever you need to do. And again, modernization, right? Something as simple as a fillable PDF. plenty of room in the text for longer messages for served agencies. So one of the mythologies that I think also hurt the traffic system in the past, and it was a mythology, was the fact that people believed that messages were limited to 25 words. Now, this is true to the extent that we recommend that routine, that is unimportant, day-to-day messages be limited to 25 words or less. But we have never had a limit on served agency messages. If you have a message to transmit on behalf of your EMA, it can be 50 words or 75 words. Now, of course, we encourage brevity. It's been said that brevity is the soul of wit, but brevity is also the soul of emergency communications. And that's true whether it's ham radio, public safety, the armed forces, aviation, it doesn't matter. Brevity is the soul of communications, emergency communications. So we want you to be brief, but the 25-word limit, that you often hear quoted by unknowledgeable people whose training and information hasn't been peer-reviewed, does not apply to emergency management or relief agency traffic or things of that nature. But again, understand that all amateur circuits have limited capacity. So if you imagine that you have, say, 30 radio operators on a voice net, say it's your local Aries net, you have 30 radio operators on there, and each has an equivalent or equal amount of traffic of the same priority, then each operator only has 2 minutes an hour to convey his information. So think about that for a minute. Brevity is essential no matter who or how or what you're communicating with. And it's also true of digital modes. You might be able to send 100 encyclopedias a minute over your super duper digital circuit. But in the EOC or command and control environment, somebody's got to read all those messages. Somebody might have to discuss the message content with one or two colleagues or functional representatives or other people in the incident command process. Then they have to go ahead and maybe do some research to fully understand the content of the message. Then they have to go ahead and draft a reply. So while those encyclopedias are stacking up really fast, the human brain processor is still working at the same speed as it did in the time of Jesus or ancient Rome. Okay, so keep that in the back of your mind. But we do have all these nice radiogram forms that you can use. This is the standard radiogram ICS 213 we developed back in, might have been 2016 or 2017. We went around to Aries groups all over the country, and we solicited examples of their radiogram ICS 213 messages that they had developed internally. We took the best practices, submitted them to a committee of people that had good experience, and we came up with this solution. And we found that Aries groups have found this to be very useful. And each of these message forms, by the way, has instructions on the back, and how to fill them out. The one more routine version here at the ICS 213, but the standard radiogram, has frequently asked questions. So when you deliver this to a non-ham, they can read about what's a radiogram, what's Radio Relay International, what do ham radio operators do, why do we do it, all these kinds of things. So this is just stuff that we've developed to kind of promote and improve the traffic system. And then, of course, our emergency plan's available on the webpage. You can dig through this at your convenience and see the different message formats and things of this nature. And then, of course, the Q&I newsletter is also available. So I don't know if I can, yeah, I guess I can scroll this up. I'm also, I wear too many hats as we've been growing this organization. But I'm the editor and publisher of the Q&I, and you can see, we try and put some general interest amateur radio articles in here, some information specifically related to MCOM and traffic handling. For example, here's the results of a main relay exercise that gives examples of messages as tendered for origination. and messages as they arrived at various locations with errors. And again, as I mentioned earlier, it's not enough to establish connectivity. You have to be able to convey all of the message content. Okay, so you can see the errors that were made by Aries operators in Maine when messages were originated, and they didn't necessarily always arrive intact or with the same meaning. So take a look at this. Look at this, for example, this medical data here. 200 units of, such and such, 600 milligrams, etc. These are some of the words that were missing, okay, or an error. So you can see here, lots of errors in these. This is why people need to have traffic handling skills, because again, when somebody hands you that message that says that the 5 derailed tank cars contain, 1,2 dimethylhexane or something, you've got to be able to communicate that accurately. But anyway, you can go through and dig through these back issues of the QNI newsletter. You'll learn a lot about our management philosophy, traffic handling, as well as some fun things. I always try, and my little window here is in the way of properly scrolling through this. I always try and include, some historical stuff in here, old telegrams. This is about wave meters, the early days of wireless, just some things to make it fun. So this gives you just some ideas. Let's see, we'll go to the web page. This is our publications page. There's all kinds of material on here for you to look at, including FCC filings, training materials, net directory, things of that nature. And so you can kind of go through that. And then if you go up to the top of the page, there's a section for the National SOS Radio Network, Neighborhood Ham Watch, general information about RRI, comms plans, traffic ops, things of that nature. So feel free to explore. Like I said, there's so much to go through. I could spend a good chunk of the evening tying you guys up, but I see that we've come to just about exactly an hour since I started. And of course, Don asked for an hour, so I gave you an hour. And let's do this here. I'm going to escape the screen sharing. And let's see, let's stop the share. And now maybe I can see if there's any questions. Hang on here, guys. There we go. So Dan, how do you handle questions? Do you do it through the...
Yeah, we'll take it from here and you just answer the questions. Lee, you want to come on?
Yeah, was that me?
Yep, it's you.
Yeah, okay, I apologize. I came in late, so let me know if this was already addressed. But most of the people here are local level MCOMs. And like you said, you're not really at the local level. What can you address recruiting at the at the regional level? What we can do is, I'm section manager of Iowa, WA0UIG, and I'm also a DTN for Iowa. And what can we do to help at the local level to help recruit for the regional level for traffic handling?
Well, that's a good question. Now, many years ago, by the way, I was offered the job of emergency management director for Pottawatomie County, Iowa. I won't tell you how.
It's still open.
I won't tell you how many years ago that was.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of a story about it that involves the Army Times magazine and a whole bunch of other things. But that's neither here nor there. But but anyway, the reality is that the section level is, again, the grassroots of the traffic system. And what the ARRL, people can really do is they can promote traffic handling, right? I mean, they can provide the training, they can get people excited about it, they can encourage participation, they can incorporate the section traffic nets and, if necessary, other parts of the traffic system at the infrastructure level in disaster exercises, even if it's in a small role of some kind. And theoretically, as people begin to see the value in it, and they begin to, they begin to participate and they take a liking to it as an operating activity, they will hopefully be noticed, and their net managers really have the responsibility to get them involved at the region level. So for example, if you have an Iowa section net, then you will need liaisons for the manual mode nets to go to, for example, the 10th region net cycle 4, right? Or to the daytime cycle 2 nets. And so having effective net managers and an effective section traffic manager is really the key. And he's got to be able to recognize the talent. And he's got to maybe cajole some people, say, hey, we could really use your help. We need a liaison on Tuesday nights to cycle 4. And that's really how you go about doing it.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Barry, you want to take the chat side and see what we got? Hello, Barry.
Basically, we've covered everything that was a question in the chat's already been answered. So there's no unless anyone wants to post a question now for Jim. It's all good.
Yep, I got plenty of time. I've got all night at this point. Unless I fall asleep on you.
The questions, please post questions.
Post them or raise your hand. Either way, we'll catch you. Dan, did you have something?
Yeah, I wanted to just compliment QNI. Is actually one of the best quarterlies I've ever read on any given topic. So, James, you're how do I say this? You make it all look too easy and too good. makes me wonder why it took us 30 years to get here. And I'm wondering, you sort of like took the guts out of NTS and moved everything to the top of it, and I haven't seen a single reference to the 690-page NTS manual. That sort of made me raise my eyebrows 25 years ago while I dutifully handled radiograms.
Yeah, I take it you're referring to methods and practices guidelines.
That's it.
Yeah. So,
I never wanted to hear that again.
So yeah, the methods and practices guidelines are sort of like the Smithsonian meteorological tables or the handbook on physical chemistry or something like that.
No. It's the committees. It's the committee's deliberations on the committee for how to deliberate on committees. Except it was handling traffic via, and admittedly, it maybe made more sense when things move more slowly. Yeah. And even now, you talk about regions and districts and stuff, and I'm having a hard time imagining a local or moderate or even the big one kind of emergency where anybody's going to want to wait for the net times to have the traffic passed.
Well, no, of course that won't happen. And well, if you look at Cascadia Rising, where we developed the prototype, the original prototype emergency plan, the data is pretty interesting. So the manual mode we basically tasked radio telegraph nets, radio telephone nets, and the digital traffic network, and the Alaska Interior digital network, which operates on a WinLink protocol. Those 4 networks participated, and so we linked Alaska, Washington State, Oregon, Idaho, and Northern California to the National Response Coordination Center in Washington, D.C. The radio telegraph nets scored 99.998% accuracy against, I believe it was 10,220 data points in simulated 5-letter cipher group messages. Message propagation times from when, say, messages were tendered for origination in the disaster area as measured to the time when they appeared in the data stream at the National Response Coordination Center, averaged in the range of 10 to 13 minutes. Okay, and so that's for a trip from essentially the Pacific Northwest through the network to Washington, D.C. But the way we did that is we had a prototype emergency plan that managed the load balancing. It went ahead and specified specific circuits for this process. And it took a fresh look at how you might apply NTS to a disaster. The digital traffic network, interestingly, scored 99.997% accuracy. Now, people sometimes say, well, that's impossible. You know, the hybrid, mesh digital network using Pactor 3 is more accurate. You know, it's automatic error correcting. Well, yes, it is, except for the guy that's typing the message into the terminal. That's the difference there, right? But, the general idea is that the traffic system can be very efficient if you are willing to step outside the box and say, okay, how can we reconfigure this dynamically to suit the emergency situation so that it works?
Now, I do have one question, which is, how come you never mentioned shares?
Well, the reason is we do have RRI registered radio operators who are shares stations, but we generally have been interfacing with Mars directly, but not with shares. Mars has the shares interface. There is some politics behind this. There is an individual who is a program manager for shares who hates NTS. I won't mention his name, but maybe when he retires, there will be a chance for a renewed relationship between shares and the NTS program.
Well, you're fighting a good battle, and I salute you. I can't keep up with you.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. We're trying, let's be honest. It took 40 years for NTS to atrophy, or 30 anyway.
No, they could not have atrophied that badly in 40 years.
Yeah, yeah, maybe not. So, we've only been at this now for, for what, 6 years or, or so.
Right.
And so
2016.
It's going to take some time.
Well, you got my attention.
Well, I appreciate that. I really do.
All right. Is there anybody else who's got a question or a comment? Want to raise your hand or type something in the chat there?
We would ask, there were some questions about the regional and the higher level nets. They're operational 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, correct?
No, that's actually not true. Now, the digital traffic network, of course, is automated. So it's operational 24/7, 365. The manual mode nets operate on a time domain cycle. So under routine configuration, there are two configurations for the traffic system, one of which is routine configuration, and the other of which is emergency configuration. Under our routine conditions, that is our day-to-day operation, there are essentially two cycles. So the region nets meet twice in the evening, twice in the day, and same with the area nets and their time sequence. So for example, if I originate a message in Iowa at 7 p.m., it goes to the cycle 4 first session of the region net at 7:45 Central Time. Then it goes to area net at 8:30. Then returning traffic to the Iowa section moves to the region net at 9:30, and then of course to the late sessions of the nets at 10. So there's this time sequence process that still occurs under routine conditions or routine configuration for the manual modes.
But they operate every day, though.
But they do operate every day, yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go to a 4-cycle session if it's a real emergency.
Right, or what we would more likely do is we would, what we do generally speaking is we assign specific circuits to specific message priorities. And it's based on geography, it's based on how far messages would typically have to travel. So if someone were to call me and say, Mr. Wades, we need connectivity between, say, Portland, Oregon and National Response Coordination Center, we would task what we call the IATN, which is a set of long-haul circuits or the digital traffic network to do that, right? Whereas if somebody is originating batch quantities of welfare traffic from an earthquake zone in Southern California, we would prefer the use of digital traffic network because they can upload that as book traffic in a batch file to DTN, and DTN would automatically distribute it throughout the United States. And then what we would do is we would issue a directive, and we would go into emergency mode. We would issue a directive to digital traffic stations asking that they, for example, download that welfare traffic by every half hour, for example, from their region node. And there's a lot of things like that that we would implement in time of emergency that's much different than routine.
Right. The question was for field day, because if each field day station sent their 10 radiograms for points and originated one to the section manager for 100 points, it would be a lot of traffic. Most of it would be local traffic, but it could be regional or cross-sectional traffic. So the question was about that.
Yeah, right. So, yes, they work during field day. I think I see some of these up on the side.
Yeah.
So yeah, we get a lot of traffic, moving through the nets on field day. Most of it stays at the section level. Some of it now is coming through WinLink. So one of the programs that we developed was what's called the WinLink RRI interface. So you can go on to WinLink, and there is a set of Radiogram and Radiogram ICS 213 forms. You can populate those forms, and then it does all the error correcting for you. So if you misformat the radiogram, it'll give you advice on correcting it for the proper format. And then it will inject it into the traffic system, where it goes to a gateway at the region level. And then that gateway station injects it into either digital traffic network or a manual mode network to expedite its delivery. And what we're beginning to see lately with field day is quite a few messages that are injected through WinLink rather than on the section net. So there's multiple paths now in the traffic system that you can use. You can use DTN, through the digital traffic station function. You can use WinLink, and you can, of course, use the traditional manual mode nets.
Okay, great. I think that covers it.
We use the WinLink RRI interface fairly extensively for the Army Mars COMEX exercise back in October.
That's going on right now if anyone wants to participate.
Yeah, we handle, we pretty much have a kind of an ongoing exercise with Mars Region 2. Any other questions that we need to take care of?
Okay, the question is, if he wants to send a message through a local RRI message net, where does he look that up?
Okay, well, the net directory is on our publications page, and which I think I showed an example of that. Mm-hmm. So if you've never handled traffic, you probably want to, when you check in, let the net control know you're new to traffic handling, list your traffic, and they'll probably assign somebody to help you out. Now, there's one thing I should point out, and that is RRI and NTS, as you might call it at the section level, right? They operate as a unit. Okay, so it's a seamless interface. So you check into an ARRL, NTS net, that message will go into the RRI infrastructure and vice versa. So any of the traffic nets on that net directory, you're welcome to check in, originate a message. It'll move through the system just like it's one complete, network.
Okay, I have a question real quick.
Mm-hmm.
James, there's some talk, rumor, and that's all it is. I don't want anybody excited here, of interfacing NTS and with Aries. Do you have any feedback on that?
Well, I don't know. I'm not privy to what goes on at the league. There's been some talk of this over the years. I don't necessarily have a problem with a unification, between the two. The only thing that I would caution, I think, is that you have to have training and standards for the traffic handling process. And so if you're going to unify the two, Aries is kind of a different animal. Every Aries group is somewhat different geographically. The political environment's different. The needs of the served agencies are different, or maybe the priorities of those agencies are different. There is a tendency in some Aries groups, and I don't want this to sound pejorative because it's not, but there is a tendency for the participating radio amateurs to perceive themselves as emergency management volunteers first and communicators second. You might say emergency management volunteers who happen to bring their own radios. Whereas I think in at least our perspective anyway, from RRI, we believe that we're communicators and technicians first, and the other capabilities are great, but they're value-added capabilities. But our first and foremost duty is to be a skilled communicator and or technician. That's what we bring to the table. And so provided, the Aries groups take advantage of, say, for example, the standardized training we've developed, they understand the traffic system, and they don't ignore it, then it makes sense. Now, I guess I'll leave it to your imagination as to whether or not you think you can herd the cats. So I think many of you are probably section managers or event section managers or SECs. I've been an SEC and STM, trying to tell an Aries EC hey, you've got to have liaison to the traffic net, or you've got to provide this training, can be a little bit like, well, I don't know, have you, I won't go there. I wanted to use a farmer's analogy, but it'd be taken the wrong way. But some of you probably can imagine what I'm thinking right now. So it's all about how you bake the cake. Let's put it that way.
I think that's pretty well said. Well said. We are dealing with volunteers and at different levels, and it is difficult in some areas. All of all areas, you have some areas that have their own agenda going in terms of what kind of communications they want to do and what they're interested and not interested in doing, and that pulls it out of sync with maybe a lot of the other areas. So it is a struggle.
Yeah, if you walk into a typical Aries group, and we're not really here to talk about Aries, but I was an SEC and very active in section level amateur radio for many years, and you walk into some Aries groups and they have all kinds of training, bomb awareness and hazardous materials awareness and first responder and first aid and all this kind of stuff, but you would see almost zero training on communications and technical skills. And then other groups were very well balanced. They were professionally run, and there was a good balance and mix between, the communications and technical skills training and the value-added services. And so, if I were the guy with the bully pulpit, I would be encouraging this thing of that. You have to have the communications and technical skills first, then add these value-added knowledge and capabilities next. That's just my personal feeling on it.
Well, it sounds like a good something to think about out here anyway. Okay, we have Dan. You got your hand up again. Go ahead.
Follow the money. FEMA's not investing in ARRL Aries, and they're throwing immense amounts at CERT and other similar community-based organizations.
Yeah, I can't speak to that particularly, but I'll give you, an example. For part of it is when it comes to grant funding is an unusual animal, which we don't have the time to talk about tonight. But an organization has to have grant funding and so forth is something that one has to go seek out, then apply for, and then have the administrative processes to administer the grant, right? The personnel, the skills, things of this nature. And I'm not qualified to comment on the league's or anybody else's management processes, right? I'm not in that loop. So it may not be that FEMA is so much overlooking amateur radio, but that the correct approach hasn't been taken with FEMA or other organizations. And you would need to talk to somebody far more qualified than me to really even address that issue.
We're going to be covering grant funding for Aries groups pretty soon on Thursday nights, correct, Dan?
Yes, it's on our schedule.
Okay.
And it's up, and we can. We have a planning committee that goes through all these things, and I call it Jello because sometimes we have something planned for June and it shows up in May, and we go with what the needs are and what the requests are. So we'll see what we do have on our planning. It's a needed subject.
Yep. I guess all things are possible. I was looking at some of the comments here. Dan from California said, herding cats is possible. Difficult, but possible. Yes, true words for sure. Yeah.
That was in response to berries and volunteers.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
And with the right catnip, anything is possible.
There you go. Absolutely.
Oh, well, okay, unless I see some more hands or there's more comments there, I think we'll start wrapping this up.
Thank you all for coming.
Yep, thank you. Thank you for your time and your interest. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I know
we had almost 60 people on.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear that.
I got a comment that the next time anything in this section comes up with regard to NTS, I'm going to say, well, watch this recording and then we'll talk about it.
There you go. Thanks, Dan.
As you go forward and things that come to your mind, if you want to come on with another something that will benefit RRI and stuff like that, give another presentation of some type, we'd be glad to have you. Just get a hold of me and we'll go from there.
Sounds good, Dan. And I would encourage those on the list or on the call here. We do periodically announce online training classes, and anybody's welcome to participate. So keep an eye on our webpage, and feel free to register as an RRI registered radio operator. We'll get you on the mailing list, and you may find some of that information useful too.
Okay, after we close this out, if you wouldn't mind sending me your presentation, PDF form or in PowerPoint, whatever you got, and so I'll get it out there so people can get to see those links you have and things like that as well.
Sounds great.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up. Mary's not saying anything in text, but I'll give him a chance to talk.
You're good.
Okay, let's close it out for another great evening. James, you did a great job. I really appreciate you coming on board and doing this.
Thank
you so much. Thank you, guys, gals.
Yeah, we've got quite a few of both. On my comment also, after we close this out, we leave these open so you guys can come back in, just log in like you did for this, so you can chat amongst yourselves and so forth. And that's what we do it for. All right, 73s, everybody. It's been a pleasure. And see you guys next Wednesday for another one.
Good night, all.
Good night.